Once upon a time, there was a young man named Eli. He wasn't intrinsically flawed. He wasn't born consumed by fury or adrift in despair. No, his genesis was like any other. A child whose gaze held sheer awe, incessantly questioning the whys of the universe, and whose inner world was painted in vivid hues. Yet the world around him, the immediate environment, proved utterly indifferent to the unique requirements of this sensitive boy. His father routinely arrived home late, his entrance marked by boisterous aggression and overwhelming indignation. His mother, conversely, would vanish into a shell of utter silence. Eli rapidly acquired the skill of treading softly, committing every creaking floorboard to memory as if they were hidden explosives. The supper ritual became a literal battleground where words were hurled like sharpened projectiles, and remorse was never uttered by anyone. However, the deepest wound inflicted upon Eli was not simply the affliction itself. It was the absolute negation of it, the pervasive pretense, the mandatory grins in social settings. It was the utter absence of anyone ever acknowledging, listen, something fundamentally amiss is occurring here. That systematic invalidating of his lived reality transformed into the very toxin that corrupted his core. You see, the human psyche possesses remarkable fortitude, yet it is far from unconquerable. Psychological injury doesn't merely reside as a memory, it integrates itself into the physical body. It fundamentally distorts the nervous system. It reconfigures a person's entire perspective on existence, on others, and most tragically, on their own self-worth. It instills in a child the crippling belief that they are not secure, not deserving, not genuinely present. As time passed, that child matured, and the facade developed alongside him. Eli became strikingly engaging, quick-witted, and amusing. He became adept at interpreting people, skillfully transforming himself into whatever persona others desired. He became a virtuoso of this deception. And yet, beneath the surface, he was profoundly vacant, utterly hollow. Like a structure abandoned after a devastating blaze, the exterior walls remained upright, but the very essence was consumed. That is the inevitable consequence of unresolved inner turmoil. It causes the self to splinter. The celebrated psychiatrist Carl Jung once observed, "The most profound tragedy of the family unit is the unfulfilled existences of the parents." Eli inherited this immense misfortune, not merely through genetic predisposition, but through the perpetual quiet, the forceful suppression, the chilling inheritance of emotional neglect. His descent into instability was not an immediate occurrence. It commenced with a lingering wakefulness, a persistent feeling that a catastrophe was imminent, even when circumstances appeared completely normal. Following that came the acute suspicion, the unpredictable outbursts of fury, the debilitating self-loathing. He found himself incapable of placing confidence in anyone, including his own judgment. Personal connections became like minefields. He would aggressively repel people, only to desperately implore them to remain. Affection became a metaphorical theater of war, where he simultaneously performed the roles of both the loyal combatant and the undercover saboteur. He attempted counseling once, confessing to the professional that he was unable to experience emotion anymore, that his night visions lacked coherence, that at times he would gaze into the looking glass and completely fail to recognize the individual staring back. They diagnosed him with generalized apprehension and clinical mood disorder, but these mere designations could not capture the true horror, the interred suffering he never acquired the vocabulary to articulate. Because when profound distress is deliberately disregarded, it doesn't simply vanish, it recedes, it ferments, it bides its time, and inevitably it erupts, perhaps as a complete collapse, perhaps as a relentless addiction, perhaps in the sudden stillness of a person who once possessed the most infectious laughter.
Eli began engaging in soliloquies, not just fleeting internal musings, but full-blown conversations, hostile disputes, agonizing shouts. He would pass mirrors without even a blink of recognition. He started carrying a notepad, frantically jotting down notions that were completely incomprehensible to all others. His acquaintances remarked that he had undergone a transformation, But the profound truth was, he had always been this way. He simply ran out of the stamina to maintain the concealment. That is the vital aspect no one discloses about a psychotic break. It is not pure delirium, it is sheer exhaustion. It is the human spirit officially abandoning the act. That is the vicious deception of unaddressed emotional pain. It denies you repose. It prevents you from forgetting. It camouflages itself as perpetual worry, uncontrollable wrath, even as supposed spiritual enlightenment. But beneath all these guises is a vulnerable child wailing, "Please, finally acknowledge me, rescue me, provide assistance." But frequently, by that point, the opportunity has passed. Because the greater world does not comprehend profound mental distress. It dreads it. It transforms it into a public spectacle. And Eli, like countless others, became just another cautionary anecdote, another data point, another instance of what went fundamentally wrong. He didn't lose his mind because he was feeble. He succumbed because he had demonstrated resilience for an excessively long period. Because here is the unvarnished truth. You do not suddenly lose your mental capacity overnight. It unfolds gradually, like a minute fissure in a mirror that eventually spiderwebs across the surface. Observers might simply state, "He just broke," but they utterly failed to witness the preceding events, the phases that were not noisy, the evenings consumed by silence, the crucial instances for which no one else was present. When you attempt to inter your past, you do not successfully terminate it. You only manage to amplify its effects. Unhealed affliction evolves into a specter, and specters do not expire, they perpetually haunt. Eli was not merely contending with old recollections, he was shouldering the complete emotional tonnage of years of abandonment, total bewilderment, intense mortification, and unexpressed sorrow. Every moment he remained silent as a child, those moments resounded back at him as a fully grown adult. This, essentially, is the genuine nature of a psychotic episode. It is not a clinical malady. It is not demonic influence. It is not even truly irrational. It is the human spirit buckling under the sheer oppression of artifice. Madness is the soul's definitive proclamation of protest. It is the agonizing outcry of a mind that has been forcefully silenced for an excessive duration. And in a peculiar way, it also represents an opportunity. Because when everything disintegrates, when the deliberate falsehoods dissolve, when the disguise is obliterated, when the world loses all sense of comprehension, you are finally left with the sole element that might offer deliverance, the truth. Eli recommenced writing, not for intellectual clarity, not even for recuperation, but simply to expel the internal tumult. The pages were absolutely chaotic. Random scribbles, crude illustrations, occasionally just the identical phrase reiterated 50 times. "I did not deserve this." That specific phrase became his catalyst, not because it afforded him immediate tranquility, but because it granted him authorization, permission to finally experience fury, to feel profound sadness, to simply feel. And within that raw allowance, he unearthed something he hadn't accessed in years: hope. Recovery does not originate with sheer willpower or a determined optimistic outlook. It commences with sincerity, and sincerity begins in the midst of suffering. Eli returned to therapy, but this time he made no attempt to appear impressive. He did not strive to be intelligent or spiritually evolved. He simply wept for absolutely everything, for the young child who was forced to mature too quickly, for the adult who never once felt truly secure, for the instability that made perfect sense the moment he ceased his perpetual flight from it. He wasn't entirely healed, but he was no longer utterly adrift. He grasped that the madness was never the true antagonist. It was a communication, an urgent summons for attention, emanating from the very components of his being that had been imprisoned. And when he finally unlocked the door, those parts did not aggressively attack him. They offered their thanks, because now, finally, he was attending to them. How does one commence this crucial journey? begin with stillness, not the dull, disconnected silence of emotional avoidance, but the reverent quiet of intentional listening. Write, shout, move, cry, but do it with mindfulness, executed completely devoid of self-reproach. Read literature that delves beyond simple symptoms, books that explore the depths of the unconscious mind. Works such as The Body Keeps the Score by Vessel de Vanderkolk, Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert A. Johnson, The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller, and Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. These are more than mere books. They are essential reflective surfaces. They will not present you with prefabricated solutions, but they will grant you the necessary permission to ask the genuinely profound inquiries. And above all else, do not seek healing for the sake of achieving perfection. Heal so that you may become profoundly authentic, so that you can look into the mirror and ultimately acknowledge the one staring back. Because the world does not need more facades. It desperately needs more individuals who have survived their internal darkness and emerged reformed.